down, bullies, blow the man down. Do me way, blow the man down. Blow the man down, bullies, blow him away. Give me some time to blow the man down.
In 1998, Steve Fontaine, a writer for SpongeBob SquarePants, had a falling out with creator Steven Hillenburg and quit the show after the first season. The dispute was over the character of Pearl, Mr. Krabs' whale daughter. Fontaine thought SpongeBob needed to operate under some kind of logic, and a crab having a whale daughter simply made no sense. Pearl was set to make her debut in the episode Squeaky Boots from the first season, but Fontaine insisted an episode explaining her origin had to be made first. Hillenburg disagreed, and eventually Fontaine was fired. Before he left Nickelodeon, Fontaine created the episode he wanted that explained where Pearl came from. He left the footage at Nickelodeon Studios perhaps as a middle finger to Hillenburg and his former co-workers. Over the years, the episode was lost, or so the story goes. I came across what was presumably this lost episode during my final semester of college. I was a devoted SpongeBob fan, having watched religiously since age 5. One day, I happened upon the Twitter page of Vincent Waller, the show's creative supervisor. I saw he usually answered fan questions, so, out of curiosity, I asked about Pearl's parentage. I waited patiently for a response. I got one after a few days, but not from Waller. A user by the name of Dretmis, Dretmis, tweeted at me, providing a link to a YouTube video called Pearl's Mother. The thumbnail was completely black. I decided I'd watch. The video began with a disclaimer telling me to pause and read the description. I did, and that's where I found the story of Steve Fontaine and his secret episode. I soon realized the fabled episode was what I was about to see. I don't know if what I found was a fan creation, the actual work of a disgruntled animator named Steve Fontaine, or perhaps even some combination of both. But the video has since been deleted, and Dretmis is nowhere to be found on Twitter anymore. If you've seen something like this, let me know. I can't have been the only one who saw it. The episode was clearly ripped from a VHS. It began with SpongeBob walking against a black background, scowling, eyes downcast. After a few minutes, SpongeBob shot his glance up at the viewer. "I hate my skinflint boss," he seethed in a deep voice. And then he erupted, "I've been working at the Krusty Krab all my life, with a snail to feed and a pineapple to keep up, and that bastard won't pay me shit for all my hard work." I jumped. SpongeBob continued, saying all sorts of horrible things about Mr. Krabs and his job. Very out of character. The scene switched without warning to a shaky live-action shot of a window in a plain room with a sunrise outside. The person recording took a deep breath, then said in a deep voice in an incredibly bad French accent, "The next day." Then the footage sped up, and the sun rose high in the sky and then went back down beneath the horizon, covering the hilly area outside the window with darkness. The live-action footage cut away to Mr. Krabs, who was roughly drawn with no color. He was in his office and was shaking violently. After a while, he began to sob very faintly, weakly. The sound of SpongeBob's rant from the first scene consumed the soundtrack as this continued. Then, the screen abruptly cut to another live-action segment. This time, mysteriously, the scene was someone's grimy, dimly lit basement. An overweight boy nervously approached a bucket in the middle of the room. He was dressed in a dull red onesie. His face was unnaturally large and round, almost like he had a horrible allergic reaction. He had oddly bushy eyebrows, and his face was covered in warts. He tentatively kicked the bucket, and whoever was filming, again, with the horrible French accent, started pretending to speak in French. He then addressed the child, who looked horrified, saying, "Oui, oui, mon ami." A time card popped up. It was framed with gold and had a rich red background. In elegant, whimsical silver cursive were the words 16 years ago. The title slowly rose up as if it were a curtain. Very romantic sounding piano music, like something from a soap opera, began to play. Mr. Krabs reappeared, now very much on model, though his colors had been hastily filled in with crayon. The landscape of Bikini Bottom looked quite nice, though the sky, ocean, was no longer blue but pitch black, and all through it weaved white wisps of smoke. The flowers that usually adorned the sky were nowhere to be found. Mr. Krabs was scuttling along merrily, singing a sea shanty in the same deep voice that had been used for SpongeBob earlier. Mr. Krabs kept scuttling as the soap opera music kept playing, becoming more melodramatic. Then there was a record screech, and the music turned loud and foreboding and screechy. Mr. Krabs entered a very plain pirate ship modeled in primitive CGI. It simply glided with Mr. Krabs on top of it, the music becoming an unbearable cacophony of ear-splitting, screechy violins. The ship gained speed, switching from hand-drawn ship to a brown CGI blob at random intervals. You could hear Mr. Krabs laughing his piratey laugh, though it was crazed and devious. The background, as if to represent how fast the ship was sailing, had turned to live-action footage of billowing smoke from a burning building. We randomly cut to a live-action scene of a goldfish swimming in a very dirty fishbowl, green and covered in algae. 2 fish had already gone belly up and were being eaten by little crustaceans. If you look closely, you could see a fish skeleton sitting in the rocks at the bottom of the bowl, meat still hanging on. A piece of meat from the dead fish's ribs floated up to the middle of the bowl, and more small crustaceans sprang out of nowhere and swarmed the morsel, killing each other trying to get at it. The camera quickly panned down to reveal the bowl was sitting on a wooden table, which had an index card taped to it. "Whales," it said. We cut to Mr. Krabs on the deck of his ship. The animation and style were suddenly like a typical SpongeBob episode from Season 1, and they stayed that way for the remainder of the episode. Mr. Krabs laughed heartily, produced a harpoon, aimed it, and fired it, all to the tune of ukulele music. Abruptly, we cut to black. In complete silence, the scene faded into the image of a massacred whale plopped on the floor of the Krusty Krab kitchen, a huge wound in its stomach. Still in complete silence, Mr. Krabs scuttled up and took out a butter knife. He promptly stabbed the whale's side. The sound of flesh being ripped apart could be heard as he pulled at the carcass with his claws. He then began to hum and scrape some meat off one of the whale's ribs, dropping it into a big vat labeled patty batter. He nonchalantly added some spices and stirred while smiling. Then, out of nowhere, there came crying, and Mr. Krabs turned around, looking more confused than alarmed. There was baby Pearl, covered in blood, having quite literally just spilled out of what was left of her mother, who'd been pregnant apparently. She flopped around in the entrails, bawling her eyes out in a way that made your heart break. We then cut back to Mr. Krabs, who stopped churning his patty mix. He frowned and tentatively began to scuttle toward the baby. The crying was non-stop and agonized. The soap opera music from before suddenly built up in the background slowly. Then, suddenly, the screen cut to a different scene. Baby Pearl had been shredded to bits. She'd been decapitated. Her head lay next to her entrails, which covered what was unmistakably the Krusty Krab's grill. Suddenly, a very loud loop of SpongeBob's trademark dolphin laugh started playing in the background, and you could hear sizzling and see smoke coming off the grill. SpongeBob's hand, spatula in tow, came down and pressed hard on a pile of Pearl's innards. The screen then filled with steam as SpongeBob's laughter died out. The steam faded away, and there appeared Mr. Krabs sitting in a rocking chair, looking affectionately at the bundle in his arm. There was a sweet lullaby playing as he rocked baby Pearl to sleep. He didn't use her for Krabby Patty meat after all, but kept her as his own child. Then sounded one last audio clip of Mr. Krabs saying in a deep, piratey, drawn-out voice, "Me darling daughter," before the screen faded to black with the faint sound of seagulls in the background.